As promised, joined now by Pat Forde from Sports Illustrated. I must also mention, Pat, the College Football Inquirer pod, wildly entertaining with yourself and Dan Wetzel and Pete Thamel, a special brand of snark and sarcasm, which I very much appreciate. So Pat is with us. We mentioned Ohio State. Let's start there. This really changes the complexion of the Big Ten in your mind, I know. Give us a sense of what Ohio State struggles mean for the conference at large.
Well, they mean hope for everyone. I think that we have looked at it as Ohio State being prohibitively the best team in that league for several years. And on paper, going into this season, it pretty well looked like the same thing. And I think Ohio State has recruited so well and coached those guys so well that we just kind of assumed they are on autopilot. And it doesn't matter who you lose because there's always another 5-star, 4-star guy to plug in, and they're going to be great too. And sometimes you assume that, and it's not true. That sometimes a young quarterback like C.J. Stroud may take a while to hit his stride. A defense that's filling a lot of holes may have guys who aren't quite ready to step up and play at a big-time level. And all of a sudden it looks like weakness. And so if you're around the rest of the league, you're looking at Ohio State right now saying, hey, we can beat those guys. We've got a chance this year.
Yeah, it's interesting, Pat, because, look, they are still plugging in 4- and 5-star players. And I can just tell you from our campus visit when Howard and Joshua and Jerry and I were there, they look different than everyone else in the league. I mean, this is as physically impressive a team as you're going to find. It is interesting. I had someone suggest to me this week, and I think there's a kernel of truth here, which is Ohio State lost so much in terms of its production. Only Northwestern lost more, I believe, nationally in terms of production from last year. And you throw in that this season you have teams all over the country who are bringing back record percentages of production, right? Because you had the COVID year and you have all these teams where guys opted to stay. And so when you lose a ton of production, I mean, those are the two teams that were in the Big Ten championship game last year. Now they operate somewhat on different levels with one another, but I mean, they're shells of what they were a year ago. Obviously, Ohio State still considered among the top 10 teams in the nation, Northwestern not so much, but it kind of speaks to maybe how things are a little different this year.
Oh, I think that's a great point because I think the ceiling is a little bit lower for Ohio State and some other teams nationally, but the floor has gotten higher because, as you said, so many players are back for an extra year. And so the experience level with guys that maybe weren't quite good enough to get drafted is up across the board, almost everywhere. But at a place like Ohio State or at an Alabama or at a Clemson, you're losing guys after 3 years regardless. They're not taking that extra year if they've got a chance to be NFL players, and those places have more NFL players than other places do. So I think it very much has narrowed the gap between the elite talented teams and those that are trying to chase them because the elite talented teams have the same churn and turnover and experience issues they normally do, but the other teams don't. And so, you see a Tulsa team that's not that great, but certainly was more experienced. You see an Oregon team that's pretty darn good, but also more experienced than Ohio State. Minnesota, same thing. And Ohio State's just not going to be able to walk in and say, well, we're more talented, so it doesn't really matter if we don't know for sure what we're doing. We'll just make big plays and win the game. It's not necessarily going to work out that way every single week.
And you mentioned it. It feels like this is a national trend here where Alabama, I mean, they were taken to the wire by Florida. They were given a really good game. We've seen Oklahoma against Tulane and against Nebraska. Clemson seems totally lost on offense. So big picture here, who's great in college football right now? Is anyone great, Pat?
No, and I think it's a lot of fun.
It's really fun.
Complaining
about. It's great.
Oh, yeah. So it's been same old. Oh, it's the same teams over and over. Well, maybe not this year. We've seen Clemson already lose, and as you said, just looks completely lost offensively. Alabama, as vulnerable as they have been in a year, still didn't lose, still never even trailed, but still, I mean, Florida's right there, a 2-point conversion away from taking that thing potentially into overtime. Oklahoma, the struggles there are a bit more surprising because that team was not replacing as much. And Spencer Rattler's a second-year starting quarterback, and quite frankly, he just hasn't been up to the standard that was set there by Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts. So that's a bit of a different issue. But Yeah, there's like you look around and there's nobody right now that I say for sure, yeah, we're penciling that team into the playoff. It's going to be week to week, wait and see who gets better, whose warts show up at a fatal time. There's just going to be a lot of intrigue and a lot of uncertainty, I think, as we go through this, which, again, will be a welcome change.
So bringing it back to the Big Ten as we wrap up this portion here with you, who's the favorite in your mind right now in the Big Ten?
I got to say Penn State. Nobody in the country, I don't think, has two better wins than they do right now. They were certainly fortunate to beat Wisconsin, but they did beat Wisconsin in Camp Randall in an atmosphere that was incredible at a time when people are still feeling their way back into a road atmosphere. That you've seen the road atmosphere bother Alabama, bothered Auburn, bothered some other teams, Cincinnati against Indiana. They handled that. And then you turn around and you beat Auburn. That's two great wins. I would rank them, I have them third right now, actually, in the country. And I would say, Iowa right now, very solid as the favorite in the West, but still got to prove they can make some explosive plays, as you guys noted earlier. But right now, I say Penn State, both sides of the ball, they've got some things going for them, and I would make them the team to beat.
Well, I'm with you on how much fun this is, Pat. I do think that college football has struggled here in recent years with the same teams dominating. It may end up being those same teams in the end. I think we both agree that a lot of those teams still have a great chance of ending up in the playoff when all is said and done. But if the process of getting there is more interesting, I think that's a win for the sport as well. Pat, great stuff. We'll catch up with you again a little bit later in the show. We were talking about Michigan State. They have captured the attention of the entire nation, including perhaps the most famous Spartan of all. How about Magic Johnson saying MSU coach Mel Tucker is building something special at Michigan State, and everyone from the green and white should be excited for this season and the future of Spartan football. Cannot blame Magic for his excitement. Into the top 25 this week after going down to Miami and beating the Hurricanes. And as promised, Mel Tucker is with us now from East Lansing. And Coach, appreciate your time. Let me ask you this first. How did you get this much better this quickly?
I'll tell you what, a lot of credit goes to our strength and conditioning staff, our dietitian and our coaching staff and our players are just working really hard, working together, for a common goal, and it's paying off.
The portal changes everything, and Howard and I were talking about this just a few minutes ago before you came on. It gives you the ability to turn over a roster very quickly, and no one did that more adroitly than you. But I would suggest it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because there is always the possibility that the guys you pick aren't the right guys, or they don't fit with your culture. And now all of a sudden you box yourself into a corner. So what is the challenge of trying to figure out not just, hey, we need to plug some holes here, we need to find some guys, but what's the challenge of figuring out, without really knowing them, whether they're the right guys?
Well, you have to find out as much as you can about the players that you're recruiting, and it's due diligence, and it takes a lot of hard work. Our personnel department does a great job, and all of the players that we required wanted to be here, and they wanted to be part of our culture. That's why they're here. They saw what we were building. It was appealing to them, and they wanted to be here. So when they got here, they bought in right away, and we went right away to building a team and not just a collection of players.
You were part of a massive rebuild at Wisconsin. You were part of Barry Alvarez's first recruiting class there, and I think sometimes people in the Big Ten have taken Wisconsin's success so much for granted that they just don't realize where it was at the end of Don Morton and the beginning of Coach Alvarez. But you guys were 1-10 that first season, and by the time you were done as a player there, you had gone to the Rose Bowl, and of course Wisconsin's been great ever since and incredibly consistent. What did you learn from being a part of that with Coach Alvarez that you've been able to translate into your coaching career? And again, Michigan State is not anywhere near what Wisconsin was when you started there, nowhere near that. But what can you apply from that?
Yeah, well, Coach Alvarez came in with a plan. He put together a great coaching staff. He had been in Nebraska, Iowa, won a national championship at Notre Dame. So he had a process, and he believed in it, and he never wavered. And he did an outstanding job recruiting. I'll be the first to say that I was in his first recruiting class in 1990, but he recruited better players every year than the first class he had. So that was the key. It's all about the players.
I want to ask you about a post-game quote that you had from this Miami game. We really enjoyed this quote on the desk, Howard and Coach DiNardo and Joshua and I. Here's what you said about Miami. Quote, "We wanted to drag them into the deep water where we live with the strain and the struggle and the pressure." What does it mean to live in the deep water? Explain that to me.
Well, we talked about it as a team during the week. We knew that we had to be best conditioned going into the game. We were prepared to play a 4-quarter game. And the strain and the struggle and the pain and the pressure is what we go through every day in our training. You know, in our weight room, in our meeting room, on our practice field. We try to make the practices harder than the games. We try to put stress on our players, put them in uncomfortable positions so they can be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so that's the deep water for us.
Interesting. Let's get into some players. Kenneth Walker has been amazing. I mean, he's leading the nation in rushing. You really can't ask for much more than that. Again, one of these transfers that you brought in had a nice career at Wake Forest, but it certainly exceeded what he did there. What stands out to you about him as a player?
There are so many things. He's humble, hardworking. He's just a great human being. He believes in the team. He has very good vision. He runs with power. He's a willing blocker. He has excellent ball skills out of the backfield. And so, you know, he's a complete back. And he's in very good condition. He's a monster in the weight room. And so, you know, he just keeps getting stronger and stronger and better. And he's extremely coachable. He's one of the best backs that I've ever been around. You know, I haven't seen all the backs in the country, but I would like to think that he's among the best.
Howard and I were just talking about Peyton Thorne as well and the huge jumps he's taken this year. How has he elevated his game so dramatically?
He's really taken command of the offense. You know, he understands the why. He gets us in the good plays and out of bad plays. He's taking care of the football and taking what the defense gives us. You know, very good pocket presence, and he's emerged as a extraordinary leader for us, not just on our offense but on our team. And that's what you need at the quarterback position.
So you're 3-0 now. You're in the national rankings. Everyone's talking about Michigan State. I want to ask you about something I know coaches think about all the time when things are going well, and that is, how do you guard against complacency?
Well, we explain to our team that it's all about what we do next. That's the most important thing. And I asked the guys yesterday, I said, how does 3-9 sound to you? And it didn't sound too good to them. I said, well, it's time to go back to work. And we were able to get that done today.
Tell us about Nebraska, your opponent this week. What do you see when you look at them on film?
Yeah, I think they're a very, very well-coached team. I think they have really good players on offense, defense, and special teams. Their quarterback's playing at a high level. He can hurt you in the passing game and in the run game, and they play extremely hard. They're playing great on defense. You know, they hold people to very low numbers, and they played, you know, Oklahoma all the way down to the wire. And Oklahoma, I think, was ranked, you know, 3 or 4 in the nation at the time. So that's a strong unit. We're going to have to be at our best.
Coach, again, congratulations on all the success to this point. It has really been fun to watch Michigan State this year. Great to have the Spartans back competing at the top of the Big Ten. Thanks, Coach.
Thank you so much. Go Green.
So that's the story with Michigan State. You see them at 3-0. And, of course, Michigan, their in-state rivals, 3-0 as well, after both of them won just 2 games a season ago. You look at the numbers, all impressive. They both run it great. Spartans have been the better passing team. Michigan maybe a bit better statistically on defense. Pat rejoins us now. Pat, maybe we're splitting hairs a little bit here, but who's been better in your opinion?
I'd give an edge to Michigan State so far. 2 road wins, and in authoritative road wins. You know, they jumped on Northwestern early. They punished Miami late. You do that away from home, that shows a lot. And while Michigan has been very impressive, they have yet to leave the big house. So as of right now, got to give the edge to the Spartans.
You only play who's on your schedule, right? You can only play them where it's scheduled. I mean, I've got to say, the Northern Illinois game, I mean, I know it's a MAC team and whatnot, but holy cow. I mean, it's a MAC team that beat Georgia Tech, and then Georgia Tech turned around and nearly beat Clemson, and you scored touchdowns in your first 9 drives. I mean, I hear you. I think the ultimate measuring stick game. Well, we're going to learn a lot this week, and I want to talk to you about the Rutgers game. But Wisconsin's going to be the huge measuring stick for Michigan, right? I mean, they have just thumped them the last couple times. You can't be one-dimensional against that Wisconsin defense. And so we're going to need to see, is Michigan's passing game good enough? In my opinion, to me, that's the big question. If you line up Michigan State and Michigan, I don't know if you agree, and you kind of say run game, pass game, defense, I think the biggest question is Michigan's pass game.
Yep, absolutely. And that's not to say they can't. They just haven't had to. I mean, as you point out, they have just been trampling teams in the running game. And so it's allowed them to just focus on that, bring their quarterbacks along gradually. Blake Corum's been fantastic. They've been explosive. They've been physical. They've done everything they want to do in the running game. But, yeah, they're going to have to throw it eventually. And, we'll see against Rutgers. That is not an easy game. But it is another game in the big house, and Rutgers has some personnel issues off of some disciplinary situations there. And then the third thing, of course, like Rutgers lives to get you in passing situations and then go rush the passer. But can they get Michigan in passing situations, or are they just going to run the ball down their throat? So we'll see. We haven't seen the challenge yet. We certainly will, I agree, Dave, against Wisconsin, because nobody runs the ball in Wisconsin yet again. Their teams are averaging less than 2 yards a carry against that defense, so they will have to be multidimensional. And as you said, Wisconsin has not just beaten Michigan, but really embarrassed Michigan the last couple of times they played. So they've got a lot of proving to do if and when they get there 4-0.
Badgers leading the nation in rushing defense. Of course, they have a big one this week against Notre Dame. You mentioned the game against Rutgers. Think about that game last year, right? It was a game that went to triple overtime. Rutgers had a kick to beat them, a very makeable field goal to beat them. And so I think you can say, well, Michigan's got it going now, and this is a great Michigan team, and they've improved so much. But, those teams were on equal footing last year. That was no fluke, the Rutgers game, and Rutgers is dramatically improved too. And so why could Rutgers not have improved as much as Michigan? I think Rutgers hasn't really played much of anyone either, much in the same way you could say about Michigan. But I'm fascinated by this game. You mentioned Rutgers being better. Maryland's a lot better, too, here, Pat. And I know people kind of take them as a pair sometimes just because these are two teams that joined the Big Ten at the same time. What has stood out to you about the improvements both in Piscataway and in College Park?
Yep. Once again, the floor coming up closer to the ceiling. I think you look at both of those programs. They've gotten better. And, there is no soft game in the Big Ten East at this point, thanks to those schools getting better. Obviously the coaching change has just worked wonders at Rutgers. Greg Schiano has totally remade the culture and the winning attitude and the toughness of that program. Just impressed by what they've done there. This year's team, no turnovers yet. That's big. 8 takeaways. That's really big. So they are not only not beating themselves, they're forcing other teams into mistakes. Noah Vedrill's played well at quarterback. They've got everything going on. Again, they've rushed the passer well. And then I think you look at Maryland and you see just improved talent. Talia Tonga-Valoa is throwing the ball extremely well. Raheem Jarrett is a high-level receiver and not the only one there. They're making explosive plays in the passing game. They did just enough to beat Illinois, but in the past, Maryland tends to lose that game on the road. So to get that win, very good for them. Rutgers 3-0 for the first time since 2014. Those teams have got a lot to be excited about going forward here.
I completely agree on Maryland. I think that was the overriding thought that went through my head. They did not play a great game against Illinois. The Illini had something to do with it. They certainly defensively played far better than they had most of the year in that first half, really, in the first 57 minutes of that game. But Maryland figured out a way, Pat, and that's what separates average teams from better than average teams is when the chips are down, you figure out a way to win the game, and Maryland did it. And, whether Illinois should have gone for it on fourth down and not tried to pin Maryland deep when they had the ball and the lead in Maryland territory in the final few minutes, you can make that argument. But the fact of the matter is they made a decision they made, and Maryland made them pay. And to me, that's the distinction. That's how you turn into a bowl team.
Yeah, absolutely. Those kind of coin flip games, you win some of those, and all of a sudden you're 6-6 or 7-5, and you're used to being 5-7, 4-8, 3-9, and that's all of a sudden the program starts to shift. and you've got to get players who can make those plays to lead a winning drive. But you have that kind of, I think, program confidence that's starting to seep in now at both those places, at Maryland and certainly at Rutgers. I mean, Rutgers goes out there, I think, every week believing they can win. And perhaps no game last year brought that home to me more than the one they lost to Michigan, where it's like they really believe they should beat Michigan, and I think that they've carried that over into this season.
No doubt. Pat Forde, great stuff. We'll talk to you next week, my friend. Oh, we mentioned Pat was talking about the disciplinary action at Rutgers. This is what he was talking about. Greg Schiano announcing this morning that 2 of his cornerbacks have been suspended following an incident with a paintball gun, both taken into police custody. The players are Chris Long and Malachi Melton, who goes by Max. Melton's a key player for them. He is tied for the conference lead with 2 interceptions.